beyond the north field. Walter had never had much use for scarecrows. After more than 40 years of farming, he knew birds were considerably smarter than people gave them credit for. A crow might be fooled for a day or two, but sooner or later it would figure out that the fellow in the field hadn't moved since spring and wasn't likely to start. Still, the north field had seemed empty without one, so that spring Walter had made a scarecrow from an old pair of coveralls, a wooden crosspiece, and a flannel shirt that had belonged to Evelyn. He'd stuffed the clothes with straw and tied a burlap feed sack over the top for a head. He regretted using the shirt almost immediately. Evelyn had been dead 6 years, and Walter had kept more of her things than he cared to admit. The shirt had hung at the back of the mudroom closet until he'd found it one morning while looking for something he wouldn't mind ruining. He hadn't thought much about it until later that evening, when he glanced across the field and for just a second mistaken the scarecrow for his wife. After that, he avoided looking at it around dusk. By late October, the corn was brown and dry, rattling softly whenever the wind came down from the hills. The nights had turned cold enough for frost, and wood smoke from his chimney hung low over the farm after sunset. Walter first noticed it while closing the chicken coop one evening. Beyond the field, the woods climbed toward the ridge, already black beneath the last orange light of day. The scarecrow had always stood near the north end of the field, with its back to the house, facing the woods. Now, it was turned halfway around, facing the house. He stood beside the coop with the latch still in his hand. The wind had been strong that afternoon, so there wasn't much mystery to it. The post had probably worked loose. The following morning, he carried a sledgehammer into the field, turned the scarecrow back toward the woods, and drove the post another foot into the ground. He tamped the earth around it with his boot, gave the crosspiece a hard shove, and was satisfied when it barely moved. "There," he said. "Stay put." 2 mornings later, the scarecrow was facing the house again. This time, Walter was annoyed, and after breakfast, he walked out to inspect the post. It was still solid, and there were no tracks around it except his own, preserved faintly in the frost. He took hold of the wooden crosspiece and tried to turn it, but it wouldn't budge. He stood there, looking at the blank burlap head, gave it another shove, then finally forced the scarecrow around until it faced the woods again. He went back to the house and spent the rest of the morning fixing a section of fence that didn't need fixing. That night, something woke him. Walter lay still beneath the blankets, listening to the old farmhouse settle. The clock beside his bed read 2:18, and somewhere outside, dry leaves scratched across the yard. Then he heard a scrape. He raised his head and listened. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable, from somewhere near the front porch. He got out of bed and crossed to the window. Moonlight washed across the yard, bright enough that he could see the oak beside the driveway and the silver roof of the barn beyond it, but nothing moved. Then he looked toward the porch. The scarecrow was standing beside the steps. For several seconds, he simply stared at it. The flannel shirt moved gently in the wind, one sleeve hanging lower than the other, while the burlap head drooped toward the left shoulder. No. He went downstairs. The shotgun stayed in the cabinet. Walter wasn't about to walk around his own yard armed because some damn fool had decided to play a trick on him. He switched on the porch light and opened the front door. The scarecrow was gone. He stood there in his undershirt, staring across the empty yard. The north field lay beyond the barn, pale beneath the moon, and the scarecrow was back on its post. He walked to the edge of the porch and looked down. There were no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. He closed the door and locked it. The following morning, the scarecrow was standing beside the barn. He saw it from the kitchen window while pouring his coffee and set the pot down. For a long while, he remained at the sink, looking through the glass. There hadn't been enough wind overnight to move a paper cup, much less a scarecrow. Eventually, he pulled on his coat and boots and went outside. The scarecrow stood perhaps 3 feet from the barn wall. There was no post beneath it, no stake, nothing he could see that should have kept it upright. He approached slowly. The burlap sack was turned toward the house. "All right," he said. His voice sounded strangely small in the cold morning. He grabbed the scarecrow around the middle. The body yielded beneath his hands, nothing but straw and old clothing, exactly as it should have been, except the straw was warm. He let go. It wasn't warm from the sunlight. The sun had barely cleared the trees, and frost still covered the grass. The warmth seemed to come from somewhere inside it. Walter stared at it for a long moment. Someone had carried it there. That had to be the explanation, and he found himself almost relieved by it. Somebody was playing a joke on him, and sooner or later he'd find out who. Then he carried it to the burn barrel. He stuffed the scarecrow inside, poured kerosene over it, and struck a match. The old flannel shirt caught first. He watched Evelyn's shirt blacken and curl as flames climbed the sleeves, consumed the straw, and reached the burlap head. Within minutes, there was almost nothing left but wire, buttons, and glowing ash. He remained there, beside the barrel, until the fire died. That night, he slept well. The next morning, he walked into the kitchen, filled the coffee maker, and looked through the window. The scarecrow was standing in the north field. Walter forgot about the coffee. It was standing in the exact spot where the old one had been, wearing faded coveralls and a red flannel shirt. The burlap head was blackened along one side. He went outside, and frost cracked beneath his boots as he crossed the yard. Halfway to the field, he stopped. There were footprints in the frost, but none within 20 feet of the scarecrow. They came from the woods in every direction, stopping short of the place where it stood. Walter crouched to examine them. Some were large, some small, and some narrow enough to have belonged to children. Others were shaped incorrectly, too long through the heel and too wide across the toes. He followed the tracks with his eyes until they disappeared into the trees. The woods were perfectly still. Walter stayed inside after dark that night. He locked both doors and checked the windows before supper. This time, the shotgun came out of the cabinet and rested across his knees while he watched television without absorbing much of what was on. Around 11, the wind died. Walter noticed because the house suddenly went quiet. No branches scraped the roof, no leaves moved across the porch, and even the old vent above the stove stopped rattling. Then, a woman's voice called from the north field.
Walter?
His hands tightened around the shotgun. The voice had been soft, almost lost in the distance, but there was something unmistakably familiar about it. He turned off the television, and for several minutes, there was only silence. Then, something moved among the trees. He couldn't see it clearly from the window. The moon was behind the clouds, and the woods were little more than a black wall beyond the field. Something passed among the trees, blotting them out one by one. Walter couldn't make out a body or a face, only a dark shape moving steadily through the woods. He stayed awake until dawn, but the voice didn't come again. The next morning, the scarecrow was gone. He searched the field from the kitchen window and felt an unexpected surge of relief when he couldn't find it. He even walked as far as the barn to make sure it hadn't appeared there again. Nothing. For 3 days, the farm was quiet. On the fourth night, the first hard freeze came. Walter woke shortly after midnight to a wooden knocking somewhere outside. It wasn't at the door. It came from farther away, somewhere out near the field. He dressed quickly and went downstairs. The shotgun was where he'd left it beside the kitchen table. He checked that the front door was locked, then picked it up and looked through the window. At first, he saw nothing. Then the clouds shifted away from the moon. There was a scarecrow standing at the edge of the yard. Walter's stomach tightened. It wasn't the one he'd burned. The clothes were different. Dark trousers, a pale shirt, but the same blank burlap head. Beyond it stood another. He moved closer to the window. There was one beside the chicken coop, another near the barn, one at the end of the driveway, and another beside the old oak. When he crossed to the front room and looked through that window, he saw more. They stood along the fence line and across the north field, motionless beneath the moon. Some wore coveralls, while others wore coats or old shirts that fluttered faintly in the cold. A few were little more than burlap and straw tied to rough wooden frames. Walter counted 12 before he stopped trying. The wooden knocking came again. One of the scarecrows near the field had raised an arm, and it was striking the wooden fence post beside it. Walter watched as the scarecrow lowered its arm. Then every scarecrow on the property moved. Their heads turned one after another, away from the farmhouse and toward the woods. He felt the hair rise along his arms. For the first time since this had begun, he understood that the scarecrows had never been looking at him. They were watching something else. A branch broke in the woods. Walter raised the shotgun. Another branch snapped, closer this time, and then another. Whatever moved beyond the field didn't hurry. It came steadily through the trees, breaking brush as it approached. The scarecrows didn't move. He watched the darkness between them. Something reached the edge of the woods. He saw no body, no face, nothing he could later have described. There was only a place among the trees where the darkness seemed deeper, a shape that hid the trunks behind it as it passed. It stopped. The scarecrow nearest the woods lifted both arms. Then another did the same. Then another. All around the farm, the scarecrows raised their arms. The shape retreated. Walter didn't breathe until the trees were still again. Minutes passed without anything moving. He remained at the window with the shotgun pressed against his shoulder, watching the woods until the scarecrows finally lowered their arms. Then someone knocked on the front door. 3 soft knocks. He turned. The house was silent again. He waited.
Walter?
He knew that voice. 6 years hadn't been long enough to erase it from his memory. He didn't move.
Please let me in.
He stared at the door. The voice was soft and patient.
It's so cold out here.
He backed toward the window. Outside, the moonlight still covered the yard. The scarecrows had changed. They weren't watching the woods anymore. Every one of them was facing the house.
Walter!
His eyes found the scarecrow nearest the porch. It too was facing the house. Slowly, the burlap head turned until it was looking directly at the front door. Walter tightened his grip on the shotgun. The pounding began. The door shook in its frame.
Let me in.